Hi, Pastor Nathan Deck with your hashtag Better Together devotion for today. And this week I've been discussing what it does it mean to give to the church. What about our money? What about our offering? And there's this one word that always comes up in these conversations. It's a churchy word. I haven't actually heard it anywhere other than in the context of church when it comes to giving, and that is the word tithe. The scriptures are really intent about the tithe. So when we go back into the Old Testament especially, you'll find that the tithe is 10% of the first harvest. It was the best, it was the good, it was the very, very first, and you gave your first 10% to the Lord. Now understand that when we're talking about that, we're talking about a system or a culture in which this was brought to the temple, where the temple used it as a part of the upkeep of the temple and the ministries of the temple and the ministries of the priests to the people. It also had to do with taxes. It had to do with the upkeep and the way that the nation was handled as well. And that carried forward into history. A lot of times in English colonies, the United States, Virginia, we paid our taxes in church. We paid them in churches. And this ended, obviously, during the American Revolutionary War, but it was a strange understanding. And in fact, Ray Stevens, a comedic singer, even got on the bandwagon one time with a song. He said, if 10% is good enough for Jesus, it ought to be for Uncle Sam. It's a hilarious understanding. The tithe is this concept, though, of giving our first and our best to God. And in the prophet Malachi, he challenged the people of Israel. He challenged the people, the faithful. He said, why don't you give the full tithe? Why don't you come and give all that God has asked of you? 10%. In fact, in Malachi, he threatens that God's going to sue the nation for this. He says, just challenge, just try, and see what blessings, see what windows of heaven that God opens up and floods you with blessings when you give of this. Now, the tithe continued in the New Testament and in the New Testament church as Christians. And it's continued today even. We often teach about getting to give a tithe. Well, you can't do that very easily for most household incomes today. A lot of people would struggle under the burden of such a goal. But what I will tell you is this: you can begin small and grow your tithe. In the same way that I began small with my retirement and have grown my retirement, I have done that with my family. We started by giving a small percentage, and then we grew that percentage over time so that we could give the full tithe. That's how we go about doing giving, is we think about it as, okay, a conversation with me and God, and say, okay, Lord, I'm praying and I'm yearning to do this. Help me find a way to where I can get to that goal. And so we began as a family. We began with a small amount, and then we grew it until it reached the amount that was 10%. I challenge you to do that in your life and in your giving, to think about what happens when you give the fullness of God's request of a tithe. Malachi promises the windows of heaven will be open. Floods of blessings will be poured out upon you. Just see what God is capable of when we give of ourselves. I hope you'll find it better together.